Hi history friends, Mr. Sherman again. Today we're going to talk a little bit about environmentalism in American history. Growing up in the 1970s, we were inundated with commercials that told us about how we should treat the environment. And so from a very young age I thought that littering was bad and recycling was good, and my parents made it a fun thing to go out and recycle. But that started really in the 1960s, and part of it is because of a book, and that book was Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and she published that book in 1962. But one of the things that you guys should know is that occasionally books make a huge impact on history. For instance, religion, the Bible, the Torah, Quran, things like that. But also, if you take a look at things like On the Revolution of Heavenly Spheres, or if you take a look at Common Sense, Uncle Tom's Cabin, all of these created revolutions, really. And Rachel Carson's book was the beginning of the environmental movement. It ushered in the modern environmental movement, basically. So here's the thing. Previously, there had been environmentalists. For instance, Teddy Roosevelt was a conservationist, and he set aside lots of land area to try to make it available for future generations, and so you could intelligently use the resources on that land, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what we started to find out much later in the 1960s was that there were some real problems with our environment, and if we didn't pay attention to them, we would run into some real problems. I'm going to redo that whole thing. In the 1960s, we realized that there were some issues that, if we didn't pay attention to them, would cause some real problems in the future. One of them was pesticides, particularly DDT. The other was things like lead in everything, including gas and paint and toys. And also the general quality of the air and the water. And so basically, those are really the topics that Rachel Carson talked about in Silent Spring. What she showed the rest of America, and eventually the rest of the world, was that pesticide companies were very actively lying to the American people. Basically, what they were doing is they were hiring experts who would spread disinformation and tell people that, oh, DDT doesn't hurt anything, this doesn't cause cancer, when in reality, of course, it did. And so what you have is a situation whereby regular people didn't know who to turn to. It's like, oh, that guy's dressed like a doctor or a scientist, and he says it's okay if I drink Roundup or something like that. And so it's a real live issue. So what starts to happen at this time is we have a new organization called the National Cancer Institute, and they started to research the links between certain types of chemicals and what it was doing to the human body. And they started to look into things like bioaccumulation, or small amounts of bad things that basically build up in either a human's body or in an animal's body or something like that. And so what happens is Rachel Carson starts to show that DDT in particular is bioaccumulating. It goes into bugs, and it's meant to kill bugs. And so these little sick bugs fall into a river because they're sick and dying. Fish eat a whole bunch of these bugs. Bald eagles, America's symbol, fly in, they grab those fish, they eat those fish. The DDT, the toxins, bioaccumulate. The more fish that have eaten more of these worms and bugs that are laced with these toxins, it's going to start to kill the eagles. And all of a sudden, where the heck are all the bald eagles? Well, that really started to wake people up. And so what happened was science starts to look into what's going on in the world, and we see that, wow, there's some real problems occurring. Let's take a look at it. And so I did a little bit of research just to give you guys an idea of how amazing American scientists are. Of all of the Nobel Prizes in science, America has earned about half of them. I mean, America, half of the Nobel Prizes in science, the rest of the world, the other half. That gives you an idea of how amazing we are when it comes to science. So we should look to science because it's a big deal. Another thing that I think you guys should know about is the fact that when you start to freak out about something, like the chemical companies and companies like Monsanto, they're like, oh, what you're saying is dumb. I can't believe how silly you are. Look, other people have been living with these chemicals and there's no problem with them. And you see this guy with like 3 eyes or something like that. What happened was the chemical companies freaked out and it started to draw attention to what was going on. People are like, why are these chemical companies going so crazy? Well, it's because they had something to hide. Just so you guys know, this is something called the Streisand Effect. It's because many years ago, Barbara Streisand, who's a wonderful singer, she was in Yentl, didn't want people to look at her new Malibu house. And so she told people, hey, stop looking at my Malibu house. And if you do, I'm going to sick my lawyers on you. So everyone started looking at her Malibu house. That's the Streisand Effect. If you freak out about something, people are going to pay more attention to it. All right, so here's the deal. Rachel Carson is going to meet with John F. Kennedy, who was the president. He created a science advisory board. Kennedy was a smart guy himself. He understood that science was huge. America was going to lead the world in science. And therefore, he's like, we're going to be awesome. I'm going to pump money into science so that we're amazing. Hi, it worked. And it still does. So here's the thing. Eventually, these ideas are going to continue. In the 1970s, Richard Nixon, not known for many things other than being a rabid anti-communist and Watergate, he was also very, very influential in creating the Environmental Protection Agency, which created things like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. He was instrumental in getting rid of lead in paint and then eventually in gasoline, which is a huge deal. It helps, well, everybody. The Earth Day is going to be created in the 1970s. And so you start to see people paying attention to what the heck was going on in the world. In the 1980s, we started to try something a little bit different. It was called more sustainability. And what you saw was an emphasis placed on recycling and conserving the environment. And it was right at this time that we got a new president who was extremely disinterested in recycling, in particularly green energy and things like this, and solar power. In fact, he ripped the solar power panels off the top of the White House, and that was Ronald Reagan. He was not a conservationist at all. Fast forward to the 1990s, and we start to see something new, and this is something called environmental justice. What people started looking at is how big countries like the United States were treating small, underdeveloped countries. This is also the time when we started to use the term developing rather than underdeveloped and third world and stuff like that. But what people started to realize was we were taking our recycling and our trash and literally dumping it onto less powerful countries. We were paying them, hey, take our trash, and they were in turn basically trying to make money off of this, and it was destroying their environment. And so there was certainly a ethnocentric, there was a racist aspect to this. Moving forward also in the 1990s, you get a book by Al Gore, who was the vice president, and it was called Earth in the Balance. And what he starts to talk about is this new idea, and that new idea is that we are dramatically impacting our environment to the point where eventually we're going to destroy our planet if we're not careful. This was the beginning of global climate change. Initially it was called global warming because it involves minute changes in temperature which have a dramatic effect over the entire world. It doesn't mean that some places are always going to be hot or cold or whatever. It just means that places that are usually hot get a lot hotter. Places that are usually cold frequently get a lot colder. And then you have just these random shifts in climate, not weather. Weather happens on a daily basis. Climate takes time, right? So climate takes longer. Weather is short term. So if people are talking about climate change, you're talking about change over a long period of time. Weather change is Michigan. Okay, so some of the things that are kind of interesting to talk about, I remember when they talked about, obviously, littering and stuff like that. That was the simple stuff. But then the ozone layer was being depleted. We attacked that because the ozone was being destroyed because of chlorofluorocarbons, or things that were propellants inside of aerosol cans. When you sprayed an aerosol can, the propellants went up and destroyed our ozone. The ozone helps to protect us from the Earth's damaging ultraviolet rays. And we did a really good job of eliminating that. Hi, America. Also, acid rain was a huge deal, primarily caused by coal-burning electrical plants and things like that. And then obviously today we're dealing with the impact of global climate change, global warming, whatever it is that you want to talk about, or however you want to call it. Here's the thing. One of the things that is interesting to do, it's called spot the anti-environmentalist. If you want to see if someone is not an environmentalist, if they really don't care about the planet, it's real easy to do. One of the things that's going to happen is frequently it's politicians. They're going to pay experts to provide disinformation. Right? The tobacco industry used to do this. Oil does this to this day. All fossil fuel industries do this. They hire people to say, hey, what's going on isn't hurting anyone. And there are people that will put on a lab jacket and look real important and say these things because they're being paid to. That's just something that happens. Next, you're going to hear people say that it's all a hoax. Oh, this isn't happening. Maybe that temperature gauge is wrong or something like that, or you know, things go in cycles. It's all a hoax. Another thing is people will default and say, hey, if we do this, I don't know if it's solar power or whatever, it's going to hurt the economy and it's going to put Americans out of work. That is an obvious default, and it's an easy one. The next one is even super easier. China's doing it. You pick someone else. Well, we're not going to deal with this, because China's not going to. All right, we're the leaders of the world. We don't have to do what China does. Sorry, super patriot here. All right. Next, you're going to hear people say that environmentalists are all crazy, radical hippie types. And basically, that's an ad hominem attack. You're just attacking the person. You're not attacking their argument. You're attacking the person. Well, they got long hair and strange piercings, probably some tattoos. Ugh, creepy. All right, that's what you do. And lastly, very, very important, you'll hear this all the time now, and it's just the idea that someone's going to say, hey, climate change, global warming, stuff like that, it's fake news. Right? The minute someone says that something is fake news, it's probably not. It's just news that they're not interested in hearing, or it's something that they already have their opinion about it. Their mind is set, and no amount of evidence is going to change it. That's really a frustrating thing, too. But here's the deal. We, as Americans, have the opportunity to make the world a better place. All we have to do is be leaders in the world. We're really, really super good at it. We are unbelievably good at science. We are super good at positively leading the world toward greater change. It's going to be up to you guys to make that happen. it's young people. You guys, it starts with voting. It ends with being involved